Sunday, July 21st is the date. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Figure Four Podcast. My name is Doug. This week, we are continuing on with episode 2 of Who Killed WCW. We're going to go over everything they presented. In the second episode, we're going to give our opinions, and same as last episode, we're going to vote on this week's episode who we feel killed WCW. Eric Bischoff is still leading that 2 votes to none. With no further ado, let's get to the show. Well, the last one, the last one we left off, that was where the big boys play. So, Episode 2 is the streak is over. So, right off the bat, Bret Hart starts the show by saying Bischoff was a prop and Hogan was the puppet master. Right. But Bret will always say that about Eric Bischoff. 83 weeks in a row, WCW beats the WWF in the ratings. And as we talked about it before, I think we mentioned it in the last episode too, Bischoff was always ratings orientated. He was out for one reason, and that was to put Vince McMahon out of business. So Harvey Schiller, Eric Bischoff's boss, calls Eric and says, Ted wants a second show. Thunder. He wants Thunder, which was the entire reason that he went out trying to get Bret Hart. And he's already come out and said, at least in his podcast, if they weren't starting a second show, if they weren't starting Thunder, he never, ever, ever would have even went and got Bret. He wouldn't have needed Bret because they were still rolling. What do you got? I'll let you take it from there. I'll let you keep going. So Schiller's called in. I'm just going over some notes here because it was all over the place. Schiller calls Bischoff. We want Thunder. You take her from there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, just basically like you said, I mean, that the guys upstairs, they want a second show. He brings in Bret for $2.8 million per year. I can't remember how many years that deal was for. But I mean, even Bret said it himself. Everything goes downhill from there. It's like they bring him in, creative. They don't know what to do with him. Almost every single week, there's a run in. There's a run in. There's a run in. And like he would come down from Calgary down to Atlanta, and before the show starts, we don't have anything for you.
And he'd sit.
And he'd sit. I mean, he's paid. He's getting paid to do nothing, but you're going to make him take time away from his family. He has to fly from Calgary to Atlanta or wherever the show is at, and you tell him an hour or two before the show, sorry, we don't have anything for you.
Now, with a second show, okay, so WCW is running roughshod over the WWF at this point, and Bischoff didn't want to do Thunder. He's already gone on record and said, I did not want to do Thunder. But even Harvey Schiller didn't have the stones, he says, to tell Ted, we don't want to do the show. Do you think, now I don't remember at the time if WWF had started SmackDown. I honestly don't remember. Or if SmackDown followed Thunder. But either way, on both shows, and as much as I loved the NWO, as much as I loved WCW, because it was like you didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah. It was 2 shows like that. It was almost, I don't know, too much.
Okay, so Rock showed up in 96. Well, I mean, Rocky, I should say. Rocky Maivia. So SmackDown didn't happen until he became The Rock. You know, that was his catchphrase, laying the SmackDown. So that probably would have been 98-ish, give or take, around that time.
Yeah, it would have been. It would have been, because it was April 13th, 1998, and I'm jumping the gun. Raw beat Nitro for the first time. So,
in 22 months.
So it would have been around there.
Yeah.
Now, again, going back to, is it too much? And Bischoff, by his own admission, they needed Thunder, which is why they needed Bret Hart, because most of the main roster was the NWO.
Yep.
It was, you started off with like a few guys, Hogan, Hall, Nash, and then if you want to add a few more guys, okay, that's cool. But when you got 4 limousines showing up and 35 guys, like half your main roster is coming out wearing NWO shirts, like, why was Virgil wearing an NWO shirt? Is it because he worked for the WWF? Like, I get it. Okay, it's not perceived as a takeover anymore, guys. We already know you're an internal group, and you want your own brand and all that stuff. We all know that, but you don't need all ex WWF guys. Virgil, he makes meat sauce. Like,
Man, you got new factions of the NWO showing up. There was the red and black versus the white and black, and then you had the LWO, and then you had. I mean, it was getting. The shtick was getting too watered down.
Very watered down. Even Virgil's meat sauce was watered down at that point. Fuck.
I think Nash said that they were basically doing 10 hours worth of booking in 3 days.
Yes. Well, they had no choice.
They had no choice because you got this new show popping up. You got to have some. You got to have some kind of creative in place.
And the difference between their show and the WWF was WCW at that time. Everything was based around the NWO. I don't care what other storylines you had, or even the Horsemen were a distant memory.
Yep.
Everything was NWO and the NWO, and it sucked because the NWO got so watered down that no one really gave a shit anymore. And then you got Thunder. Like Nash had even said years ago in a shoot interview, like, "Oh yeah, I can't make Thunder. I hurt my knee."
Yeah.
You know, and they never questioned it. You know, like the big guys making the big money, which they should have, but I mean, it's Nash.
So you brought up that date, April 13th, 1998. Raw beats Nitro for the first time in 22 months in the ratings.
Yes.
That I'm pretty sure that is a pivotal moment, because here now you've got Stone Cold, who in the WWE is the new anti-establishment.
See, this is where I was going to go, and I got kind of sidetracked. I was going to, when I was talking about with the NWO, like still pretty cool, but getting watered down. WWF with their second show has The Rock, has Steve Austin, has Triple H, has The Undertaker. Those are your big stars. And then you got your mid card that's still pretty damn strong, but the storylines are still pretty interesting there. What does WCW have? Bret sits in the locker room coming from Calgary, just making $2.8 million a year. The NWO comes out and says, "Too sweet." As usual, they might spray paint somebody, and that's about it. Like at that point, not even the luchadors or the cruiserweights were holding their own because the show was so fucking watered down and they were running out of ideas for the NWO. It's like, okay, who is the end? Then here's the $1 million question. No one saw it coming. I mean, they were prepping them, but got prepped too fast. Whose ass is the NWO going to kick next?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing every other week. Hogan comes out, he's got the belt spray painted, the finger poke of death happens. I mean, like it was getting to the point where the fans are like, okay, we've been doing this for a little while. WCW sees that you got Stone Cold flipping birds and drinking beer and beating the piss out of his boss. So now they come up with their own idea, like, well, Jesus, we need to have our guy. Who the hell are we going to put in place? They bring in a big bald dude, put some black trunks, some black boots on him. Bill Goldberg is born.
Yep, here he comes, and no one saw him coming. Like because he was pushed too fast. Like he's a great big bugger, bald head. From day one, like the minute he started winning, it was like, oh, he's a Stone Cold ripoff. That's all he is. He's a Stone Cold ripoff. But he was completely different, where Steve Austin could go out on the mic and give you a hell of a promo. Where how long did it take for Goldberg to talk? You know, Kevin Sullivan wouldn't let him talk, which was also up the mystique of Goldberg.
Yep.
Which was really cool. But the thing again, they pushed him to the moon, but they didn't give him time. He wasn't learning the craft. He was getting over like Rover.
Oh, yes.
But he wasn't learning the craft. The dude couldn't wrestle.
No. And Brett has said this multiple times. And this was before the kick that essentially ended Brett's career. He's like, going into their match, he's just like, just please don't hurt me. Like, take care of me in the ring. I'll do the same for you. And I mean, let's go back. I just want to touch on this real quick. John and Brett absolutely hated each other.
Yes.
Storyline wise, as well as in the locker room. They never got along.
Personally and professionally.
Brett always took care of him. No matter what. He told Sean, you never have to feel unsafe in the ring.
And vice versa. Like, as much as Sean hated him, Sean never went out. He just screwed them. He screwed him, but he didn't hurt him.
Yep.
Didn't hurt him. God damn it.
That's the difference between those two.
And yeah, Goldberg was going out like hurting guys. But again, he's not, I keep going back to it. He's not given time to learn his craft. He's getting over. People love you. Go out and kick someone's ass. Okay, bah,
yeah.
It's not all Goldberg's fault. I mean, fuck, if they took a dump truck full of money and were shooting me to the moon, and I was the greatest thing on the planet and professional wrestling right now, and my imaginary record just keeps fucking growing, and they keep throwing money at me and telling me and promising me the world, hell, okay, screw this wrestling. I look good. I got a wicked body. I look mean as shit. I go out and I power bomb guys, jackhammer guys, and I still get paid, and no one's going to get mad at me.
Yep. He was basically given free shot in the ring without even being taught, like you said, without learning the craft. And that's just as much uncreative as what it is on him. Brett basically said in the interview, he's like, someone needs to tell this guy that, you're not really going out there and spearing somebody like you would on the football field.
Yeah.
But he's hitting them that hard anyway.
Yeah. Oh,
some guys.
We've watched.
Some guys
watched him, man. Like, he would spear guys and they folded like an accordion. Like,
absolutely
that had to have hurt. It had to have.
End of the day, man, he took things too far. I thought he was way too stiff in the ring. It was like if I can compare it to anything, it was a freight train out of control.
Mm-hmm.
If you want, that's what you want to call him.
Animal.
Now,
Hawk had a promo at WrestleMania 8. The Legion of Doom were out. A runaway train, nobody driving. Mm-hmm. That's the perfect way to describe Bill Goldberg at that time.
So he's well on his way now. Goldberg is. He's kind of like, I mean, they compared him to Mike Tyson. Absolutely brutal. Black trunks, black shorts, or black boots. Goes into the ring, destroys people, leaves. Doesn't cut a promo. We don't ever hear him talk for I don't know how long. And I know we touched on this in the last episode. That leads us up to the Georgia Dome.
Mm-hmm.
44,000 tickets were sold and 10 million people tuned in around the world.
Days. In three
days.
Goldberg had no idea he was wrestling Hogan until he saw it on Thunder on TV at home that night.
Yep.
He had no clue he was wrestling Hogan for the championship. And
we talked about that, how much of a cash cow that could have been.
That would have been huge.
Dude, for a sold-out Georgia Dome, plus 10 million people watching on TV.
Yeah.
At $45, $50 a pop?
Well, I think at the time, those pay-per-views, they were probably $30, I think at the time. But
still,
man, oh man, oh man, that would have, we touched on it last show. Hogan and Sting, that was huge at Starrcade. When Sting took that belt, Goldberg Hogan would have trumped that.
Absolutely.
It would have, but again, Bischoff, And again, I got to give the man credit because Hogan gets a bum rap a lot of times. It was Hogan's idea. It was Hogan that called Bischoff and said, "I'm going to put him over in the Georgia Dome clean, brother. 1, 2, 3 in the center. It's time."
Yep.
I know Hogan, gets a lot of crap for being a politician and taking care of his spot, but his idea. And
Yep.
Bischoff should have said, "I love it. Absolutely love it. Next pay-per-view." Not on fucking Monday Night Nitro. Forget Bischoff he just could not get, I'm banging my papers here. I'm getting so worked up. He could not get putting McMahon out of business, out of his head long enough to realize that you're making mistakes, man. You're making mistakes. Yep. Now that's Bischoff. Now, Bischoff had bosses, okay? Eric Bischoff might have been the executive vice president or president of WCW, whatever the fuck he was. But he had bosses above him, like Brad Siegel and Harvey Schiller, who weren't wrestling guys. They just had a title. But someone should have been smart enough to say, "Eric, what are you doing putting this on national television for free? We can make millions and millions and millions of dollars off of this. Put it on pay-per-view. Save it for the next pay-per-view." So I'm not going to fully blame Bischoff because there were higher ups that should have come down and said, "Now, wait a minute. You saw how well Hogan Sting did at Starrcade. This is going to be way bigger than that. The Georgia Dome is big, but if you have a smaller arena than the Georgia Dome, you can charge more for the prices because there's not you can charge more for the seats because there's not as many of them. And the pay-per-view revenue is going to go through the friggin' roof." What monetary gain did they get from TNT putting that show on for free? Oh, they got ratings. That's it. That's all they got was ratings. They got no more money. They got nothing. They might have had a few more advertisers say, "Hey, can we advertise on TNT?" Peanuts compared to what they could have got in pay-per-view revenue.
Now, like they say, hindsight's 2020. And I'm sure if Bischoff could look back on that and say, "You know what? That's a great idea. Let's do this on pay-per-view." But at the time, like we said, he was all about the ratings.
All about the ratings.
He wanted to bury Vince McMahon in the ratings and completely obliterate the WWE. He can say all he wants that he never intended on that or that he never said that. That's exactly what he wanted to do.
Now let's not kid ourselves either. Corporate in WCW, they didn't want it. They did not, like the higher ups didn't want, Ted Turner wanted wrestling. Even the executives in TBS and Turner Broadcasting did not want wrestling. They didn't want WCW. They figured it was hard to get ad revenue for wrestling. And that was a quote. And then I believe it was Brad Siegel had a meeting. I think they showed this meeting and were like, "Oh yeah, there was X million amount of families that tuned in or buy rates or whatever, the Nielsen ratings or whatever." And they said, our ad revenue is actually doing pretty well. So I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, but the higher ups were trying to come up with anything and everything that they could to get rid of WCW because they didn't want them. Now The Rock says the WWF's answer to WCW was the Attitude Era. Yep. That was their response because WCW, they didn't really go edgy. They stayed with their storylines to be realistic.
Yep.
They still wanted to keep it real, but they didn't push the envelope like Raw and SmackDown did. Like Raw and SmackDown was like, "God damn, can you really put that on television?"
Yep.
WWF they had basically, well, they had racism, they had boobs, they had transvestites, they had, is he gay? Is he not? They had porn stars. They had, you fucking name it. They had a crazy guy running around with a sock in his crotch and then he put it in your fucking mouth. WCW didn't have any of that. They were still based with the NWO.
Yeah. Where WCW, they kept with what worked in 96, 97. Sometime 98, 99, in that Attitude Era hits, you've got DX essentially getting letters from USA Network to Vince McMahon saying, they continue to do what they're doing, we're dropping you from the network. Like, you know you're doing your job right if you're trying to be edgy and be racy when the network is sending letters and emails to your boss saying we have to censor this. Like, you have to censor them.
Do you remember that night that they got on there and the presidential thing from 10 p.m. to that was an actual letter from the USA Network they were reading.
Yep.
Watch your fucking mouth. God damn it. Fuck. I totally forgot when I was going off on what WWF had. I don't know how I forgot DX, but yeah, they had DX going around. You had 10-year-old kids at school getting suspended for 2 days. What'd you do, Johnny? Told him to suck it. Like the WCW did not do that. They were still NWO.
You had some kids in high school walking down the hallway, doing crotch chops to their teachers and the principals.
Yep.
For Jesus' sake.
Yep. Shawn Michaels said, "I don't have to listen to you. Suck it."
Yep.
So
I mean, essentially, what WWE was pretty much on board with doing was, let's take what WCW was doing, but do it better.
Well, they
essentially
didn't just take it better. Eric Bischoff, when you look at whenever he was approached by Turner to say, how can we compete? And Bischoff thought to himself, okay, well, everything they're doing, I'm going to be different. They're taped, I'll be live. They have cartoony characters, I'll keep my storylines and characters more realistic. But in doing that, they kind of like took their eye off the ball. And in 1998, Bischoff is told that WCW needs to bring in families. We don't want to just have a wrestling product. Like, what did they think? What did they think professional wrestling is? Like the Ted Turner, by Eric Bischoff's own admission, TBS and TNT had a video library of old, corny, family-orientated programs.
Yeah.
What was the one show that was always on? It drove me crazy. The Andy something show. It was like a black and white show, and Andy Griffith, whatever. Yeah. Black and white show, just a good, wholesome show. And that's what WCW executives basically wanted to turn WCW into. Now, I remember being young. Would you want to watch a nice, wholesome show with your family, or watch guys running around, throwing chairs, flipping people off, see boobs, and scream, suck it, and crotch chopping everyone? If you're like a 13-year-old kid. I think Andy Griffith could suck it. To tell Bischoff they need family-orientated shows. They were going backwards. They were going absolutely backwards to the way before Turner bought the National Wrestling Alliance out of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So, Eric, whenever WCW is moving forward and there's talks of this merger, and next thing you know, executives are having more and more and more power, Bischoff is realizing that Turner doesn't have the power that he had in 98 and 99. Turner has no power anymore like he did in 96 when this merger is coming up. Eric's getting burnt out. The ratings are down. He's getting shit on from every single angle. And he makes one move that he thought was going to help him out. He gives Kevin Nash the book.
Yep.
I'll let you take that from there.
So yeah, Bish is getting burnt out. He's getting tired of people coming at him. So Nash steps in like a good buddy that he is, and he's like, "Hey, listen, pal, let me take over the booking. I can take that off your hands for a little bit. Gives you a little bit of a break." And I mean, that's just as good as the inmates running the asylum. Like you've just given the keys to Arkham Asylum to the Joker and Harley Quinn, and now they're running the show. Essentially, that's what that was with Nash taking over the books. Ironically enough, shortly thereafter, you get Kevin Nash versus Goldberg. I mean,
I'll never sit here and deny that Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, for that matter. I mean, my God, Scott Hall came up with the Sting Crow character. Both of them have great wrestling sense. They're smart as far as coming up with ideas and being creative. At least I thought Nash was. But whenever it's like Hogan, like we talked about, given that contract with all those bells and whistles with complete creative control. You don't care about the company's bottom line. You're more concerned about your spot or where you're at in the company. And giving Nash the book, the first thing he did was put himself in a world championship match with Bill Goldberg. That's one of the first things he did. And again, now, okay, so Bischoff is still the boss. I'm still going to shit on Bischoff a little bit. Now, he gave Nash the book, but you would think he's still kind of overseeing him. Brad Siegel is still sitting up there.
Yep.
As much as people give Bischoff a lot of flack for, well, you should have did this, or you took your eye off the ball or whatever, he still had higher ups. And again, granted, they're not wrestling people. They never fucking were. They're nerds. They're so smart. They're socially retarded. They're so smart. And they didn't want, well, I can't say that about Siegel or Harvey Schiller. I never really heard anything bad about those guys, but they were still supposed to be overwatching this. They were supposed to be overseeing this. Bischoff should have been overseeing Nash with his booking. All he was doing was giving Eric a break. And for him to put himself almost instantly into a world championship match with Bill Goldberg should have been squashed. There were still guys Goldberg could have defended the title against. I think DDP
100%.
was still pretty big. I think the Giant was still a big thing. Probably could have got a couple of return matches with Hogan.
Yep.
Like just bide time. I just think it was an mistake on Bischoff's part again. Yes. But again, Bischoff had guys that he's overseeing that were overseeing him that did nothing.
And why? Because they wanted this to flop on its face.
They did, and they can't.
At the end of the day,
didn't.
They're looking at this from the standpoint of, wait, so you're running the show, but you're going to give the talent the power to book. Oh, let's see how this goes. And like you said, and I'm just going to say this about Kevin Nash. Great in-ring presence, could move, could work a show.
Pretty good
he
promo.
Could work a match.
Yep.
Pretty good promo. Giving him the power to do that. Wayne Gretzky is the greatest hockey player to ever play.
Agreed.
And he was a shit coach. Just because Nash is good in the ring, good on the mic, does not mean that he would have the best decisions in terms of booking.
What got me watching episode 2 was whenever he looked and said Goldberg had the belt too long. what? He's a destroying machine. Look how long Roman Reigns had the belt. Now, I would love to see someone do an interview and sit down with Nash, like, since this documentary has come out, and said, do you think Roman Reigns had the belt too long? And if he said yes, someone would tell him he's fucking retarded. Because the way that Roman was meant to carry the belt and be, like, just conquer everybody because he had a faction. Yep. Goldberg was on his own, and at the time he was a machine and no one can beat the Terminator. So for Nash to say he had the belt too long, bro, what were you and Scott Hall snorting last night? Like, it's ridiculous.
So the thing about that match, Kevin Sullivan, he still has a little bit of input in terms of creative at this point.
Well,
he wanted a clean finish to the match.
He's more of an agent. Like he's creative, but he's an agent. But Nash has the book.
Right.
Nash is Eric Bischoff.
He wanted a clean finish to the match. All of a sudden, you see someone jump up on the apron with event staff on the back of their t-shirt, and they're holding a goddamn stun gun, and it's Scott Hall.
Yeah. Yeah. And he tried to defend it again. And we talked about this last show. You're going to hear something here, folks. I apologize. He said that the old adage in wrestling, and it is true, if you go back to the territory days, when the babyface chases the title, that's when the money is to be made. When the heels have the belt, that's when the money was to be made. They were still making money off of Goldberg as champion. Yep. I'm getting worked up and I'm getting sidetracked on it. I understand the philosophy, but God damn it, Nash for years talked about the dinosaurs and the old ways and blah, 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 blah. And then he tried to go back. Now, maybe that's all bullshit too. He's just trying to mask the mistakes he did. Like we all say, hindsight is 20/20. Because he was saying this in the interview for Who Killed WCW, but to say he had the belt too long, Jesus Christ! Like I don't get it. And that whole match, that was the stupidest finish. I agree with the stun gun, and it wasn't done right. I can't even, like, that was when WCW for me, like, it was still pretty cool. Goldberg made it cool again. But for me, that's when it, like, okay, it's not going to go any higher than this. It's going to start dropping now. When the belt went on Nash and whatever Goldberg was, 168-1 or whatever the fuck his record was it time? And they've even asked Goldberg, was it time for the streak to end? Goldberg said, I don't know. He said, that's not my call. He said, I just went out there and did what I was told. I got my check and I went home.
Yep.
He didn't care enough at the time to start questioning stuff and that goes back to not honing your craft. Call a little bit of Ultimate Warrior-itis.
Yeah, I can see it.
I'm over. Give me my money. I'm going home.
Yep.
Like never had time to develop his style, where Warrior did. Goldberg didn't. He was just pushed to the moon right out of their training facility.
The power plant.
The power plant. So January 1999, Rock and Mankind fight for the WWF Championship, and it's taped. Nash challenges Goldberg for the title on Nitro, but then Hogan comes out, and then all of a sudden Hogan's got the World Heavyweight Championship match that night. So I remember this night, we were in the living room, and Dad wanted to see Mankind fight The Rock, and we were like, oh no, Hogan's fighting Nash. And they timed it out. So where the finger poke of doom happened, like we watched a little bit of the Rock Mankind match, but they timed it out because they were both pretty close on when they had to get off the air. Finger poke of doom. Hogan covers. He wins. They're laughing and celebrating and being jerk offs. We go back over. Mick Foley is the world champion in the WWF, and Dad was fucking pissed right off because he didn't get to see the finish. Oh, for fuck's sake, you guys turn the channel for that shit? He was pissed. And you know what? I don't. It was just more NWO crap. Now, Bischoff never said who booked that. Was it him? Was it Nash? Was it Hogan's idea? I still don't know whose idea the finger poke of doom was. Maybe it was Hogan and Nash. I don't see Eric Bischoff coming up with that finish. I just don't. But whoever's idea it was, I don't care if you're the booker or if you've got creative control. Whichever one or both of them came up with that, you need to be stripped of any power you got because that was fucking terrible.
I'm leaning in the direction that was on Nash for that booking, because maybe backstage he's taken a lot of heat for putting himself in the heavyweight title match against Goldberg.
They could very well be. I never thought of that.
And this is Nash's way of saying, my hands are off of this. I'm done.
Yeah. Hey, you didn't like it when I put the belt on myself, so I'll just take it off. Here, give it back to Hogan.
Yep.
And puts the NWO back in the spotlight.
Yeah, that's what I took out of that. Or at least that's my thought. Will we ever know? Probably not. But it's open for speculation. That's the direction that I'm kind of leaning in.
He didn't care, though. Nash said there were a lot of mistakes, but none of his checks changed. It was
right.
He went there. He literally, he didn't have the passion in WCW that he had in the WWF. It was literally going in, give me the money, and I'm going home.
Yep. And hey, I mean, WCW at the time, they're bringing guys in. It was a cash cow. Scott Hall was going for more money. Nash is like, well, Jesus, Scott, you're going for that. Can you get me something similar to that? Nash goes.
Yeah, because they would always get a bump.
Yeah. And I mean, Nash went on, I think it was in the first episode, and he was talking about Hogan. He's like, Hulk was getting $20 some $1,000 a month for just showing up on a show and wearing the NWO t-shirt, $140 per day per diem. So for meals and shit. On top of that, he's getting close to $8 million a year. He was the highest paid guy in WCW.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, guys are showing up. They don't care about the craft or the profession or putting on a good show for the folks. At the end of the day, their contracts are pretty much guaranteed.
That's right. Well, they were. They were absolutely guaranteed. That's why whenever they finally did close the doors, a lot of the guys didn't come over because they still had paychecks for 2 years or whatever it was.
Hey, Goldberg stayed at home and was making oodles of money. The same for Sting. And if they showed up to WWE after the buyout, after the purchase, they would have had to renegotiate new deals.
And you know what? That's not a knock on them either. Fuck, I would have done the exact same thing. Why am I going to go on the road when I'm getting paid bundles of money to sit at home? Good on them.
Exactly.
Fuck.
Absolutely. I would have done the same thing. But I mean, a lot of people were wondering why didn't Sting come over? Why didn't Goldberg come over after the purchase? Why would they?
Yeah. You got to look at it from a business standpoint.
Absolutely. And, keep in mind too, Sting was no spring chicken at the time.
He was compared to now, but
right. Sting had a lot of hard miles on him, man, from back in the days of the NWA and
TNA,
traveling all over TNA, all that circuit. I mean, geez, and the damage that he would put himself through, some of those moves that he would do in the ring at his age at the time, they all add up. And shit, if you're getting paid.
But he also now on that, he did more dangerous stuff in AEW than he ever did in TNA or WCW or the NWO.
Oh.
You never saw Sting jump off a fucking balcony.
Hey, maybe he's on some really good painkillers.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Who knows?
I'm 48 and that made me hurt.
But I mean, yeah, Nash, I get it. Like you said, he didn't have the passion for it. He shows up, he gets his check, he goes home. So I still think that that's a possibility. He didn't want the negative press on him. Okay, let's do the finger poke of doom, and the belt transfers over to Hulk, and I'm out of the limelight for that.
Yeah.
They also noted too that WCW was starting to turn into a bad chronic finish disease where matches weren't, and Brett said it. I'll go back to what we said earlier in the show. There was a run in every other night. Someone
Or
was coming out,
or ref bumps.
or
Something.
ref bumps. Something was happening. So chronic finish disease was definitely starting to creep up.
It was, yeah. The product just wasn't good. And now you can say that Bischoff was burnt out. I don't know what kind of creative team they had in WCW at the time. I'm sure they had a crew. They had to have. I can't see it just being Bischoff because he had too much on his plate as it was. But I'm sure
Yep.
like there was Kevin Sullivan. I don't know if Jim Cornette was still there or or who was there. But they had to have a crew, but whoever they had wasn't good. And it wasn't just that. Now, this is where, like we talked about the finger poke of doom, this is where WCW really started going down. People in Turner knew that that Monday night spot was huge. That was prime real estate, and
Yep.
they wanted it. So they're sitting back. They've got to be thinking, you know what? Give the book back to Nash. Let him come up with all the creative. This is fantastic because the Sharks were in the water. They smelt it. They wanted
Yep.
that prime time spot. Then next thing you know, WCW, it starts coming out that, oh, WCW lost X amount of millions of dollars this month. WCW is losing money. They're hemorrhaging money. And I've talked about this in the archives, and I got it right from Eric Bischoff's podcast, that at the time, you know, when you were in charge of a certain department, as he was with WCW, you had your profit sharing, you had you know, like all this stuff. WCW's money they didn't even have, as even when they were at the top of their game and running the wrestling world and the top rated show on TBS and TNT, they didn't even have, if you looked at a spreadsheet with all of Turner's income, they didn't even have their own line. They were at the bottom of the list in a category called other. So what other departments would do would come in and they'd allocate money
Yep.
from WCW to put in different parts of Turner or where it was going to make their bottom line look better. So I think there was one time they said WCW lost like $40 million in a month or something like that. It was some stupid number, and I could be wrong. People don't realize that money was being taken out of WCW and put in different areas of TBS and TNT to make those other people's, these corporate guys that didn't want the wrestling there anyway, because you don't want to
Yep.
lose your profit sharing or whatnot, because you had to be at a certain level in order to get it. They didn't want them there, but they were happy they were there at the time so they could take that money and not show that they were losing the money, and WCW can just take the heat, and they didn't care and they wouldn't say anything because they didn't want it anyway.
Exactly. And I mean, the more that they could prove to the other higher ups, like, oh, look, you know, this wrestling thing it's costing us money. You know, like look at how much that they lost this year, and look at how much they lost that month. It was feeding right into what they wanted at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, they Bischoff also goes into where there was some bullshit spread about him, where Bischoff was handing out money,
Hmm.
contracts to whatever, and getting kickbacks from
Yep.
supposedly getting kickbacks from the other wrestlers, and they did a huge audit on this, and it came out that it was bullshit. And this is Eric Bischoff said after this happened, when they tried to like railroad him with bullshit stories, this is when he really started to like not care. He was just fucking done and couldn't care less. And you can't blame him. It's like, okay, I'm doing a great job. Ratings are down a bit. You people are taking our money to make us look bad. When you're the ones losing the money, now you've got higher ups coming in and saying, you're taking money, giving guys huge contracts, and they're giving you a percentage of it. After working my balls off for years, and in 1995 or whatever it was, they finally turn a profit for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to start throwing this shit in my face. I'm done. I'm fucking done. So
yeah, so summer of '99, like Bischoff is burnt out.
he's done.
That's like he's done. He doesn't know what the hell is going on. He doesn't know what direction to turn in to try to right the ship. Ted has pretty much lost all control.
He has no power anymore. He lost his office, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, like he has no control anymore. The other higher ups are essentially saying, "We run the show now."
Who are not wrestling people. They knew nothing about professional wrestling. They knew nothing.
Eventually Bish is told, come to our office, and he's essentially let go.
September 10th, 1999.
Yep.
Harvey Schiller told him to go home.
Yep.
And they couldn't fire him. He still had his contract. They just told him to go home. So he went home, talked to his wife, said, got fired today, loaded up his plane, and he went to Wyoming to go fishing. He still brags about how good the fishing was that day. He still brags about it. But I don't blame... Now, Harvey Schiller is his boss. I don't blame Harvey. I don't know if it came from people above Harvey. I don't know if it was Harvey's idea or if it was, you know what, go... we might bring you back. Bischoff actually never went into that great a detail. He was just told go home, and that's all he's ever talked about. But he still had his contract. So I don't know if that was discussed, but I'd fucking do it. Because Bischoff it was a 6-figure contract for sure, plus a movie deal. Plus he would have had his stock options or whatever the hell. He did well. So you're telling me I don't have to worry about any of this bullshit anymore. Kevin Nash can keep the book, whoever the fuck you want to give it to. I just got to go home, drink beer, smoke weed, fish, and you're going to keep paying me? Bye fucking bye.
And listen, man, I mean, he's burnt out at this point. And if the stress of running that show is off of his shoulders, I don't blame him one bit. I'd be on board with it too.
At this point, he's getting fought from every fucking angle and from every executive in TBS, Time Warner, call it whatever the fuck you want. He's getting hammered every day, 7 days a week. His budgets are being cut. He's getting blamed for monies being lost. And I don't blame him one bit for saying, you know what? Fine, I'll go home. No goddamn problem. You guys make it better. And it didn't get better. As we're going to find out, it's going to get a lot fucking worse. Now, we're going to do this again. So, I've got a list here. This is the end of episode 2. So far, Bischoff is 2-0, the one that killed WCW after the first episode. So I've got a list of names here. This is who we're going to vote on. Brad Siegel, Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, or Time Warner. This is a tough one. This is really tough.
And like you said, like we've shat all over Bischoff an awful lot between last episode and this one. the blame at this point doesn't solely rest on like there's blood. The blood is not just on his hands.
No, it's not. At this point, it's not.
I'm going to go. I'm going with Brad Siegel.
Thank you very much. I'm going with Brad Siegel as well. So now, as of now, Brad Siegel and Eric Bischoff are tied at 2 because, and we've talked about this before, as much as Bischoff, yes, you're in charge, whatever, he's got people to answer to too. Brad Siegel did nothing to reach out to Bischoff. And even in this show, all Siegel did was talk about the state of WCW. He did nothing. And even from Eric Bischoff, Bischoff never said anything good or bad about Siegel. In his podcast, he said he still speaks to him from time to time. But it's in passing pretty much. But Siegel never reached out. He never tried to fix anything, never tried to give opinions. I don't know why Brad Siegel was in the position that he was in WCW, because he didn't do anything.
He didn't do anything.
He gave Bischoff the reins and said, here, make me look good, is basically what happened. Make me look good, Eric. And that's not fair. So like we've basically covered in the first few episodes from the early 90s up until September 10th, 1999, Eric Bischoff did great and then was told to go home by Harvey Schiller. But absolutely fuck all happened to Brad Siegel, who was Eric Bischoff's boss. Harvey Schiller was Eric Bischoff's boss. So he had 2 sets of eyes looking at him. You would like to think watching what he's doing. And obviously fucking not. But Bischoff is told to go home while they're still sitting back making more, like Bischoff was doing well for himself, but making way fucking more money than Eric Bischoff as executives that didn't have to do a thing, that didn't have to produce a show, that didn't have to worry about advertising, that didn't have to worry about anything. Keeping the wrestlers happy, nothing. They sat up in their corporate offices doing fuck all, and it makes me mad. It's just ludicrous to think.
It is. It's the fact that like, and I would assume that Brad and Eric, like, aside from being, like boss and employee or subordinate, whatever you want to call them, there's got to be some kind of a friendship there at that point.
Oh, of course.
Or the fact that, like you said, he basically sat in his crow's nest and watched Eric get shit on and shit on and shit on and blamed for the loss of money, for, handing out ridiculous contracts and possibly getting a kickback, not coming to his defense on anything.
No, well, Brad Siegel, they did an internal audit and they realized that whoever made the claims against him, now I don't know if it was Brad Siegel was the one, because I'm sure it would have had to been an independent, someone outside. They're not going to have someone within corporate do it. Or maybe they did because they wanted WCW to fail anyway. But I'm sure at that point, Brad Siegel would have had to have stepped in and do his own investigation. If he at least wasn't involved in that, I don't know. Maybe he was blowing someone for his position. I don't know. But I'm just glad at this point. I'm glad that we're not completely shitting on Bischoff. He kind of got a little bit of retribution. He's not the only one that killed WCW, and Siegel, we're holding him responsible to a point. Fuck you, Brad Siegel. And that's going to do it, guys. So Eric is out of the doghouse. He's still in the doghouse. Brad Siegel's curled up beside him. Maybe they're snuggling. I don't know. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We had fun bringing it to you. And next week, we're going to bring you part 3 of Who Killed WCW. Until then, my name is Doug. I'm out.